All right, our presentation is about descriptive research by Haley, Prisha, Soham, and me.
So the first method that we researched about was survey research, and an overview of this is basically it acquires information about one or more groups of people by asking them questions and tabulating their answers. And questions could be done in a variety of ways, and they could be about their characteristics, opinions, attitudes, or even previous experiences. And the ultimate goal of survey research is to learn about a large population by surveying a sample of that population. So some of the key terms that we learned were survey, which is the instrument that researchers use to ask respondents a question or a series of questions. Respondent, which is the person who is actually taking the survey. Demographic data, which is the socioeconomic information that is expressed statistically, which could be in terms of employment, education, income, marriage rates, birth and death rates, and there's many more factors. A hypothesis is a proposed explanation or a prediction made on the basis of limited evidence, and it's like a starting point before you start the investigation. And a filter question is a type of question that is used to identify a subset of respondents who are then asked other questions. So some of the pros of survey research, overall, it's a pretty unique way of gathering information from a large group of people or a cohort. And some advantages include having a large population leads to greater statistical power. Also, surveys usually have the ability to gather large amounts of information. There's also many validated models that are already available for you to use. It saves you money on research costs, and it's usually pretty quick and easy to make the surveys. And also, it can quickly display trends in the market. Some of the cons about survey researching are a survey design makes critical demands on a researcher, and if they're not carefully addressed, and if they don't eliminate all of the external factors, it can place the entire research effort in jeopardy and affect the answers or affect the overall data. And survey research only captures a fleeting moment, a single moment in time, but change is always taking place. People could change their answers or their thoughts after they do the survey. Survey fatigue could lead to response bias, people would get tired of answering questions. Respondents might skip answers or they might quit in the middle of a survey. The answers that the respondents provide, they are the answers that you provide in your choices. They must reflect the possible answers of the respondents. And also surveyors and questions can also be a little biased. So there's many different ways of data collection that are commonly utilized by researchers, and some of the most common ways are in-person interviews, telephone interviews, mailed questionnaires, and online questionnaires. The method that you decide to select will depend upon the type of research that you are conducting, the response rates required to reach the valid data, the cost, and several other factors. The data can be presented in a variety of forms, and usually it's either qualitative or quantitative, depending on the survey questions. So here's an example that I found in a research paper, and the paper basically used a survey study of the association between mobile phone use and daytime sleepiness in California high school students. So they sent out a questionnaire containing an Epworth sleepiness scale to teens, and they asked questions about qualitative and quantitative use of the mobile phone. It was completed by students attending Mountain View High School in Mountain View, California, and the sample size that they used was 211 students. And the researchers concluded that the relationship between daytime sleepiness and mobile phone use was not directly related to the volume of texting, but instead it was related to the temporal pattern of mobile phone use.
The second method was correlational research. A correlational study examines how one variable relates to another variable by seeing how one variable affects another. Correlation can be found if the study variable changes in a predictable fashion when the other variable is changed. When a correlation is found, knowing the value of one variable lets the researcher predict the other variable with some accuracy. Some pros about correlational research are that it allows researchers to see to what extent one variable has an effect on another. It is useful in generating scientific hypotheses. It can be used to study large array of variables that cannot be easily tested for, and it can serve as a starting point for experimental research. Some cons about correlational research is that you cannot have a definitive answer as to whether there is a real relationship, as correlation does not imply causation. The relationship between the two variables may be the opposite of what the researchers infer. The variables could be affected by other variables that were not taken into account, and other research must be used in conjunction for a definitive answer. Data are collected by seeing what the value is for one variable and comparing that against the value of another variable. For example, a researcher may find the height of a person and the weight and compare those two values. If the data shows that as height increases, weight also increases, the researcher would categorize that as a positive correlation. All data are quantitative. The most common method of presenting a set of correlational data is by using a scatter plot. The coefficient of correlation is a numerical representation of correlation with a scale from -1 to 1, with 0.9 representing a strong positive relationship, -0.9 representing a strong negative correlation, and 0 representing no correlation. The coefficient of correlation can be found using the equation below. An example of correlational research is this here. This article uses a correlational study to find that physical activity does have a relationship to pain, fatigue, and depression in patients with spinal cord injuries. Data were collected by interviewing patients and assessing them. Due to this being a correlational study, the researchers state, as the results are correlational, no causality can be inferred.
Okay, so the next method of research is developmental designs. And so there are three main types of developmental designs. So there's cross-sectional studies, longitudinal studies, and cohort sequential studies. And cross-section studies, they sample and compare data from several different age groups. Longitudinal studies follow a single group of people over the course of several months or years. And cohort sequential studies pretty much combine the two, and they follow several different age groups across a period of time. And so some vocab. So correlations are a measure of the extent to which two variables are related. Internal validity. So this is the extent to which a piece of evidence supports a claim about cause and effect within the context of a particular study. And then developmental research, the systematic study of designing, developing, and evaluating instructional programs, processes, and products that must meet criteria of internal consistency and effectiveness. And so some pros. So the cross-sectional studies, they allow for all the data to be collected at a single time, and this is much more efficient. And longitudinal studies, they provide the opportunity to create correlations and predictions. And then developmental studies as a whole allow for data across an age group or across a period of time to be compared, which allows for predictions to be made in the future. And then some cons. So cross-sectional studies don't allow for correlations or predictions to be made. And then age groups in the cross-sectional studies may have been raised under different environmental conditions, which could cause the test that they take to be inaccurate. And then for longitudinal studies, they're collected over a long period of time, meaning participants are most likely to be lost over that period of time. And then when people are tested with the same instrument or test over and over again for a period of time, their improvement might be caused by practice, not a change in the characteristic being measured. And so data. So in a cross-sectional study, people from several different age groups are sampled and compared. In a longitudinal study, a single group of people is followed over the course of several months or years. And they identify potential mediating and moderating variables and correlational relationships. And then in cross-sectional studies, the data is collected over at one time, not over a period of time. And so most of this data is presented by scatter plots, or also they can be presented by normal line graphs. So this right here would be a scatter plot of data, and then this right here would be like a normal line graph. And then in this study, researchers wanted to test how effective the use of several different developmental methods of research were when studying language and cognitive impairments. So they used several different methods, such as longitudinal studies, in order to predict trajectories. And they also use cross-sectional studies that are followed up with a longitudinal study. And then, so both of these methods of developmental designs are used in this research.
All right, so observational studies. An observational quantitative study has limited pre-specified focus rather than just recording the observation, like using hearing, touch, smell, see, or taste. An observational study will focus on quantitative data of a specific behavior or trait and record how many times it has occurred. And the researchers have to be as objective as possible when conducting the study. Some vocab for learning about observational studies are quantitative, meaning data relating to frequency and numbers. Pilot study, which is a small preliminary experiment conducted to test the feasibility and other aspects of the real study. And inter-rater reliability, the extent in which two or more observers agree with what the results are. Some pros and cons. So 3 pros I have are, which they're good for observational quantitative data, and they avoid any bias in the research, and they get the thoughts of and analysis of other researchers. And some cons are they requires a lot of time, requires a lot of help from other researchers, and usually this needs to present a lot of results. For data collection, data is collected through observations of behaviors and see how often they occur. Multiple researchers need to collect this data and collaborate to see if there's any conclusion that could be agreed on. For example, a study about the role of teachers during recess noted 5 different behaviors and how they were seen with different teachers. The study brought the researchers together, and they determined that teachers mostly perform engaging activities with kids during recess. And how this data is presented, usually they would use pie charts, column bars, or separate the data in columns to assess the information, and this would give researchers a visual sense of what they're looking at. And one example I found was that a national study tested the accuracy and safety of 50 pharmacy prescriptions. To collect the data, pharmacy staff were asked one day to observe 100 prescriptions to find any errors. And the accuracy of these prescriptions were 90.3%. And that's it for our presentation.
Thank you for watching.